Okay, welcome to session 6 of our Unfinished Revolution Colloquium. And this session is entitled Networked Improvement Communities. And as you'll find out, we're gradually scaling up to sort of the scale of sizes of considering things within the strategic framework we're talking about. But before we get into this, we have a short announcement by Peter Yim here.
I've got several requests from the questionnaire responses that people wanted to have access to the slides even after the live event. First of all, the slides are available along with the archived webcast, but now we've also worked it out with Stanford so that the links to the slides are also available even when the webcast is moved from live to archived. So if you go to the webcast access page, all the previous slides will be available shortly, and as well as the live ones, obviously. The other thing I needed to say is I apologize for the delinquency in getting last week's questionnaire out. I was sick most of the week. Session 5 questionnaire is out now. Session 6 isn't, and hopefully before the weekend I'll get that one out as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That's one of the interesting things that's happening sort of for me personally during the course of this is as I keep groping about whom it is that I'm really addressing. And I know there's a sort of a spectrum of interest and and knowledge and the background, etc. in there. I keep being oriented so heavily about the scale of a strategy, so I'm going to start right out hitting that again here. And if it somehow seems to people that, oh, he said that before, it's that year after year for the last 40 years, the problems I run into, besides not being well organized and incoherent and things like that, is that it's very, very hard to get people to sort of think about the kind of changes that really are there to go after or are really going to happen to us. So this is just over and over again. And when at times like what we're facing now are really coming about us, where change is just monumental that's going to come, we really either have to get used to cranking our heads open about what's likely to happen and what we need to think about if we're going to face that sensibly, or we're going to get swallowed, hit by a tidal wave. So anyway, so I start out that again this session. So please don't go to sleep. We start out by the early introduction about the Millennium Project and the very earnest thing that's been going on for 3 or 4 years about really surveying among a lot of distributed parties around the world how to isolate what the major challenges are for mankind as we come into the new millennium. And it's just a beautiful sort of work in that respect. And you look at every one of those 15 problems and you realize, hey, that has to be addressed collectively. And more we're going to see that the issues that are extremely important have to be dealt with collectively. So we come to this conclusion that, oh, if we don't get smarter about working collectively, we're going to be in trouble. So that's the pursuit that's been driving me all the years, is how do we actually help get mankind smarter in doing its collective coping. And the emergence of the computer, and a particularly interacting computer, just opened a brand new door. And so the sort of picture we've developed so far is that the scale of the impact of the technology is just going to be explosive about getting smaller, faster, cheaper, and invading so many sort of application areas. So anyway, that just creates an avalanche. So the scale of that raises itself a big challenge. And then if the challenge that we take up would be, how do we get to be more effective collectively about dealing with complex problems? Oh, we realize that problem too is of a scale that's sort of not usual for people to say, let's collectively go after something of that scale. But it seems to me a very critical sort of issue for mankind that we start facing that. And if there is a chance to boost our collective capability, let's go after it. So that's just year after year what I've been working around in, coming up with ideas, fitting them together, getting them knocked down, bashing them out, sorting them out myself, etc., and etc. like that. So that's what I'm trying to put across in this colloquium, and I call it, that's the unfinished revolution. About, not the unfinished revolution is not e-commerce. That's going to be part of it, but it's sort of e-brain or e-thinking or e-collective activity. So anyway, so this unfinished revolution, the assumption is that that's only going to succeed if it applies a truly scalable strategic approach to this problem. So in talking about strategies and scalability of them, we sort of get beyond where the normal dialogues are that we're all used to dealing with. And so that's creates problems for me to explain it, for me to make a formulation that seems to work. But above all, what I really need very badly is for getting people that for a while face-to-face and then more or less distributed to be in continuing dialogue to sort of work out a lot of the domains of it, to get consistency in the perspective and try to find ways in which if this persists in being a sort of a viable strategy and trying to make the value propositions to the different segments of society that would have to get in gear and do something about it. So anyway, so this basic aim in here of this strategy is to produce an appropriate evolutionary environment. And we've introduced the idea of improvement infrastructures. We've talked about the concept of a social organism as representing sort of a way you could think about a human organization, and that these organisms, like other organisms, are going to evolve, and that evolve in response to a lot of different pressures, but also internal perceptions and what they can see about the world too. What are the options they have for evolving? Which ones have any particular values that they appreciate that can go be better? So the big thing about improving the improvement infrastructure is to produce better visibility for all the different evolving organisms. And they need to participate in that because it's not something that should be dictated from outside. So in working collectively together to get those perceptions of where's best to go, what's happening out in the world, where should my organization move, then how should it move also is something that collective operations can help. So the C and the B kind of concepts that we've raised out there fit into the sense like that. So anyway, how do we get this evolution of ever more effective improvement infrastructures and that they evolve into an interoperable global improvement infrastructure? Because if what we need is fairly global sort of solutions about the way we deal with collective things, we have to have an improvement infrastructure that gets global too. And so anyway, social organisms have the best informed choices for their evolutionary targets and the best options for implementing their evolutionary steps. So that's kind of the idea. So again, we'll just go through some of these terms that we got. That's capability infrastructure that we've talked about in the past. Well, then there's a capability improvement infrastructure that's trying to improve the capability infrastructure. And then the basic concepts of the capability improvement infrastructure were the A, B, and C activities. And we talked about when you pool the C activities, you get something you could call an improvement community or C community. And collective IQ sort of measures in there as being a very basic set of capabilities that help you do that kind of improvement, infrastructure improving. And we isolated a set of those capabilities and called them Kodiak as sort of a cluster of capabilities that are kind of easy to focus on rather than saying collective IQ. And there are probably more capability components than just these Kodiak ones that'll be in the factors about how you do better collective IQ. And of course, you can create a very, very smart organism, but if it's not stable emotionally or something like that, you're in trouble. So how do you deal with sort of emotional stability within organizations? And so you see things where people, just massacre other groups of people like they've been happening the last years. You say, well, they may be may be collectively intelligent, but they're certainly insane collectively, which can happen. And so we talk about the dynamic knowledge repository as being sort of a basic core factor in the Kodiak, etc., the most visible sort of thing. And it may turn out that there are others that are as important at that, but it's something we've grabbed on and said, hey, that's a very important such. And the basic components of those emerged many years ago for me of saying, well, we have to manage and record the dialogue that's meaningful, and at the outset you don't know what's going to be meaningful, so you better just get in the practice of recording and interlinking and doing all the stuff of managing the dialogue that's going to be important. And then you also have to keep track of the outside world, what's happening there, so you have an intelligence collection. And then these things have to be integrated so that at any one time you have a coherent sort of picture of what's the state of things. So that's where the integration part of Kodiak, to develop, integrate, and apply the knowledge. And it's got to be integrated so it's most useful and applicable. So these are things that are just put out there that are important. So we say, can significant sized groups of people really improve that? And it certainly don't see any basic reason why. So a strategy, because it's a big complex problem, is that we get the improvement infrastructure and then we start learning how to improve it with the Kodiak kind of capabilities. So that leads us to the bootstrapping sense. So explicitly plowing back in the improvement infrastructure the best current improvements and relevant capabilities that emerge from what you're doing. See, if you just sit there and get fed from a consultant about how you should change, you're not doing the bootstrapping. The bootstrapping loop goes way out someplace and how the consultant gets in there, but you're not. But it is a feedback loop in there. But we need to think more about what you call bootstrapping. And then NICs are something about networking. So what constitutes a NIC? And this is something that we're going to talk about. Well, today we said today is going to talk about NICs. So we have a number of improvement communities, and whether or not they are NICs yet, they are candidates for being a NIC. And in fact, we sort of hand-selected them as they have special characteristics that makes them appealing to be recruited in that. So anyway, and then you say, okay, the job of a NIC is, it's a multi-component or multi-membership community of people trying to help work together, pooling their C type of activities so that they can boost their own C and B capabilities and knowledge and experience. So anyway, it says, okay, if they start using the Kodiak explicitly, you can say, start using network, you say, okay, they can be a NIC. And so there could be a lot of organizations that can start calling themselves NIC, and you're not going to be able to argue about it unless you get a more refined term for it. So we said, all right, let's back away from confrontation of that sort and just say, and the next step of the strategy is a NIC of NICs, where you might get much more leverage of that. So this is a NIC where the members are themselves NICs, and they're pooling together so that they can help in this sort of C community feedback way to improve their capability to be active NICs. That's the ones we're trying to get most interested in like that, and so we had to get a sort of a term for that. So we just start, somebody facetiously said this some years ago or something, but bootnik, but we don't have another term yet that's emerged. But that's just saying, okay, they're bootstrapping if they belong to an active meta-NIC, and they're feeding stuff back that they're all contributing in that meta-NIC to know how to be a better NIC. So they're NICs that are bootstrapping. And that's sort of a key to the whole strategy, is doing that. So it may sound kind of cute or silly, but I think it would work a lot. So anyway, pooling their C-level knowledge is a big important part of what they're going to do. So this provides both knowledge and experience, and this is something that people often get excited and overlook, that, oh, the DK Dynamic Knowledge Repository is everything. No, it's the way you manage the evolving knowledge base, but the ability to get people have that knowledge really workable and get the experience in working with the processes and methods that really produce this effective stuff is another step like that. So you can't just have online distribution of a knowledge base and know that you're going to get the kind of bootstrapping effect we want to have here. So a NIC has to be much more dynamic than that. So this is one of my very favorite diagrams, in case you haven't noticed. And because it really puts together so many of the factors in here, starting with just what the very basic capabilities down here that humans have to depend upon. And a human that doesn't have any training or education or socialization at all can't fit into what you must call its augmentation system. It can't fit, it doesn't know how to employ the tools and all that, it doesn't know what kind of processes, methods, and customs, etc., and the skills and knowledge about it going. It's essentially helpless without these things. And so what these tool system and human system to which they get conditioned and trained and so on are, and the conditioning is that they have to be socialized and they have to be sort of conditioned so that they can work with other people in teams and they know the customs and what constitutes supportive bonding and what constitutes effrontery and all of that. They have to have processes like that so that those have to be integrated into the way a person gets introduced and puts on this augmentation system. So then you get further into it and you realize the capability of any individual or any organization or something like that is really constituted by a whole infrastructure. It's not some rigid da-da-da-da like that. And so there are lower level capabilities down here that are absolutely vital to anything above them, like being able to read or talk or speech or many of those others, and knowing how to do things. So I have to do that. So that whole infrastructure is something that I get lost when I do it by myself, but that's where I would really like to sit down with people and start untangling and pointing out what some of those infrastructures look like, and then some of the interrelationships between them. But you know that one sub-infrastructure part of it is that which can make for improving the capability of the rest of the infrastructure. So that becomes very important, that capability improve. And then we go on to talk about the collective IQ or something like that. And this is a figure we've shown before, that the many nodes within an organization need to crosstalk. They need to have a dynamic knowledge repository that's been implicit a lot in the past, but sort of like that can be more and more explicit, and dealing with the outside world like this. And you get this idea of saying, well, our social organisms sitting there, if they start pooling the kinds of outputs that they can create of resources and knowledge, etc., that can come back and serve their capability improvement infrastructures, then you've got sort of a bootstrapping, community bootstrapping effect. So that's the basic idea of improvement communities and NICs of doing that. So the problem of trying to convince people about the value of this thing and give them instances in today's marketplace and world, it's very hard. So if any of this strategy is ever going to work, it's got to start from the ground up about how do we get communities of people starting to develop these concepts or something that may be better, etc., and to do it. So here's what we called a NIC, and then the thing of if that was a NIC where different customer organizations, different organizations who serve whatever customers or clientele they have like that, are pooling their sea knowledge like that, then you says, okay, if they're doing that, then you look at this organization, which we said in the past, a large organization is made up of smaller ones. Each of the smaller ones has to have its own dynamic knowledge repository and be dynamic about it, but all of them are working concurrently, and then there has to be a composite. Whatever their clustered organization needs to have for its knowledge has to be concurrently evolved from a lot of the components of what are in the others. So that's the big challenge of concurrency. Well, that's the same thing that NICs and meta-NICs need to do. So you just model the whole thing in that way. So anyway, these evolution has to take place as a complex thing. It's more and more you realize there are communities of parties that deal with different factors and that and different like that. So just saying, hey, we're going to have one representative community dealing with a tool system and one of the human system isn't going to be enough. There are too many other sort of interesting disciplines and concerns and capabilities that are mixed into that. So there'll have to be for a while quite a few communities representing these different parts, and they have to learn to work together. So we come like, you know, you could think of it like a matrix organization. Like in the aerospace world, I learned, oh boy, you got big projects, and then you got the functionally capable units like draftspeople and designers and stuff, and they'll be assigned to different segments of these projects. So there was a matrix. And so it may well be that then the different communities are like those functional things that have to represent different kind of interest groups, concern groups, stakeholders out in there, and that they need to be involved as communities with other communities that are working on specific challenges about how you improve things. So something like that. But that's that multiplicity of evolving things that factors into this coevolution thing. So it really takes a lot. So anyway, so recruiting, enlisting, creating appropriate communities is a critical task, and launching all this stuff. So that's what we get. So then there are selection criteria for considering which of the limited initial resources you can have in putting up some of these NICs together and getting them going, because it's going to take unusual funds. Well, which ones do you want to pick so that as you start working with them, you get the best leverage on the output like that. So anyway, there was a paper I wrote about things like that back in '72 that had a big influence on me. This is a live URL in the top if you want to go see that. And so we're kind of favored today to have a speaker that's a longtime acquaintance of mine, Howard Rheingold, and he wrote a chapter about me, and we're still friends. And so anyway, so he's been for 2 decades working on here, and so he's going to be giving you a talk, and so we'll see if we can find your slides. So they switched machines on me, and we had a whole bunch of problems. What do you know? Okay. Are you?
There's a stack of documents.
Are you ready, Howard?
Oh, anytime.
This is a mouse. It's an Apple mouse. It's deprived of some of its normal things. Only one button, but.
I once went to a place that had a lot of people who were CEOs of companies, and was surprised to watch them come up and operate in an environment. And many of them said, "Well, how do you work this thing?" Like this. They'll die, and that will go away. I guess this is a slide that Doug made.
Somehow, what happened?
Oh no, this is my
No, but
site.
I made it.
Uh-huh.
Part of mine.
Oh, okay. So you're gonna do this here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is, Macintosh has different things on it from.
Just the escape key.
Right.
And on your desktop, if you
Can I minimize this?
can shrink that, or there you go. Rheingold's talk is second one down. Double click.
So we're going to charge you for the extra time.
Okay. Can we go back one on this, or is this?
Backward, forward. Forward, backward.
Okay. I guess it. Okay.
So now you have to go hit that one again.
Right.
It's been a long time since I could teach anybody anything.
I'm not sure where the intersection between what I do and what Doug does is to be found. I guess one way I was thinking of that when I was watching Doug explain things is that Doug has been doing this from the top of his head for quite a while, and what I'm going to talk about is really things that I've been doing by the seat of my pants for quite a while. Then Doug thought his way into this, and I really just kind of stumbled into it. I met Doug because when these personal computers came out, I was convinced that there must be a way to write with them, not knowing that there were some people who were using these things then called text editors. And via Xerox PARC, I found out about these things and about Doug, and that led me to write Tools for Thought. I remember the day I met Doug, driving home on 101, feeling that my life was going in a certain direction because I had met this person. So probably there are others of you out there who have had that experience. And it was not something that was really prescribed. It was just I started thinking about things and got a personal computer, and eventually word processors came along, and I wanted to plug into this stuff I had heard about with the ARPANET but wasn't qualified to participate in. So I discovered these bulletin board systems around, and there was something called The Source about 1982, 1983 when I first started messing with this stuff, and then The Well, which was less expensive. So that this first slide is really just about the fact that for me, cyberspace has always been a social place. And I set out looking for information, but really found people and stayed there quite a while. And I wrote another book called The Virtual Community about all that. Both books, the Tools for Thought, which I talked about Doug, and The Virtual Community, I have revisited and re-interviewed people and have updated them, and they're both coming out from MIT Press. So those of you who use the Stanford bookstore, go ask them to stock those things. It was not long before I was spending hours a day online. And that's a longer story than I have to tell here, but I think like many people who got drawn into this business of communicating with others online, I had some conflict with my wife, who felt it was strange for me to be dealing with these invisible people and sometimes be laughing or crying and nobody else was in the room. And in the book I tell a story about our infant daughter. One night my wife discovered a tick on her head, and 11 o'clock at night, it's not really a big medical emergency, but if it's your first baby and there's this gross bloated insect sucking the life out of your baby's brain, you want to communicate with someone. My wife called the pediatrician, and I logged on to the Well and got a look from my wife, which it's one of those, we're going to talk about it later, looks. And fortunately for the rest of the story, I went to the parenting conference where a lot of discussions among parents took place and found the discussion topic about minor medical problems and posted a query. And fortunately for me, I got email back from someone who I knew to be a legitimate medical authority, although his name really is Flash Gordon, MD. And this is true. And I had to remove that tick by the time our pediatrician got the call from her answering service and called my wife back. So that was sort of the beginning of the truce about this. Of course, my wife is now online all night, and our infant daughter is now a teenager, and she does instant messages, chat, and conference calls on the telephone and claims she's doing her homework. And she gets really good grades, so she's doing her homework. A number of different experiences, many of them voluntary, some of them commercial enterprises, some of them done for myself, some of them done for others. Over the years, I've probably started 15 or more virtual communities. And to some degree, ones that I'm involved with now are more consciously improvement communities and are involved with our ability to collectively be knowledge resources for each other. So as a writer, this has been an incredibly invaluable resource. Ever since that tick incident, it's been just part of my life to be able to put a question out there and get an answer back from someone, maybe someone I had never met before or never heard of before. And there are issues about the quality of that information. And of course, we were doing this for a good decade before the web came along and search engines came along. If you combine that capability to sift through all that information out there, with the capability of a group to do kind of collective knowledge gathering for each other in something of a gift economy. Well, Howard's been helpful to us. He's got a question. I think I know where to find the answer. Why don't I provide that for him? That's been a part of my life, and I have not, I don't think it would have been possible for me to have done the things that I've done personally and professionally without having that. And a lot of that, before I tried to write about it or sat down to think about what I'm going to tell you, has not been something that I have formulated and abstracted the way Doug has. It's been, like I said, things that have been discovered by the seat of my pants. More consciously, I am involved in trying to raise the bar for the kind of discourse that can happen in a many-to-many, asynchronous, synchronous, increasingly multimedia kind of community atmosphere. And I believe that the kinds of communities that Doug is talking about, which are in a large sense designed, can be informed from what we learn from these informal communities that are only very partially designed. Mostly they're grown. So I think in order to grow them, you have to know them. You have to be inside them. You have to go through some of what is required. And some of what is required is somewhat onerous, as all attempts to deal with diverse humans who communicate with each other regularly are. People have conflicts. The fact that you are disembodied, no one can really punch you in the nose for what you say, does create the possibility for a lot of misunderstanding. As we get more and more bandwidth involved in these communications, and a lot of the lack of cues goes away. But I think as long as you're not in the same room with people, there are going to be exacerbated social problems. And how a group deals with those social problems, you could probably have a book right there. And I believe that aside from whatever our intellectual goals are for participating in a distributed community, we are social beings, and we're going to have to deal with these personality conflicts and do it within some kind of governance framework that people feel is more or less fair, or they will go away. And I think maybe I'll get to that. The media themselves are evolving very rapidly these days. For a long time it was words on a screen, and it was Usenet-style BBS or an IRC or chat room kind of synchronous activity. Now we are seeing increasingly millions of people having access to what Doug cooked up decades ago, which is to have the video, the asynchronous, the synchronous, the search capabilities, the voice, all in the same environment. Gee, we've had the telephone for close to 100 years, and people still abuse it daily. Our social literacy about communication technologies lags the capabilities of the technology. That's not gone away, maybe because more people are aware that there is an invisible cloud of social norms around any technology that involves humans communicating, that we will begin to more consciously try to raise the level of awareness about those norms. I think that the paradigmatic story on the internet is the Usenet and the September that never ended. It used to be that every September a lot of freshmen would get access to the internet and to Usenet, and they wouldn't read the facts and they wouldn't understand netiquette, and the people who participated in that community took the time voluntarily to teach them those norms, because the more people in the community who understand those norms, the more valuable the community is to everyone. It's a collective good. It's a commons. And if people understand how to contribute more to it than they take out, then it becomes increasingly valuable to people. AOL dumped several million people onto Usenet a number of years ago at one time with no instruction in netiquette or any kind of idea that there were norms that existed out there. And that became known as the September that never ended. And in that particular community, it may be that what kept Usenet's signal-to-noise ratio fairly manageable in a totally anarchic community for decades broke down because the people who passed the norms along were overwhelmed by the people who were coming aboard. Norms are things that people voluntarily teach each other because they work for a group. Rules are something that you assign, and it's rather more difficult to garden norms than it is to design rules. The web and the millions of people who have come online recently, if you look at that hockey stick curve of people online, one obvious implication of that is that most people in this communication environment are new to it. So that problem of the social literacy and the norms is a big one. Are we going to be able to evolve our way to making this as useful for hundreds of millions of people as it was for tens of thousands of people in the early days? So every virtual community has a social contract, whether you set out the rules in the beginning or whether they emerge from people dealing with transgressions. Online communities can exist without people cooperating or contributing, and some of them go on for a long time because some people have a need for conflict and enjoy it. And it's fine for those places to exist, and I don't need to make a moral judgment about why people have a need for it, but there are other places that need to have more cooperation than you would find otherwise. And there's a whole discussion about how can you create such a social contract for a group. The one thing I will say is it's easier to formulate it first and have people agree to it than to try to get a bunch of people whose only connection is online to try to come up with something like that. I've found that people adopt roles, what I call coaches, hosts, and librarians. Coaches are the people who are going to sit down with you or get on the telephone with you or email with you and help you figure out how to use things, whether those things are online tools or whether they're norms. Hosts are people, you could call them facilitators. I like to call them hosts because it's like a party. You need to meet and greet people. You need to move the fights from over by the punch bowl out into the hall. You need to keep the conversations going. Those roles naturally emerge, or you can train people to do it. And increasingly, in the commercial world, there is a professional role for doing that. And the librarian is like someone whose job is knowledge management, but also to live in the community and know where things can be found. Idle talk is social glue. If it's not fun, people really aren't going to contribute. And it's kind of hard to prescribe fun. The best thing you can do is to not step on it when people start having it. So if they want to start a conversation about brewing beer or watching television, it's probably a good idea. The people who make friends in those informal conversations are more likely to contribute useful knowledge to one another in a more formal setting. Learning of any kind is a social activity. And in the world I live in, where people are not compelled to participate in these communities, they do it voluntarily. Inventing things together and sharing knowledge is fun. And if it's not fun, they don't do it. I think we're just beginning to see people become more serious about what they've done with listservs and Usenet news groups for many years, and to have more intentional communities of short or longer duration of people whose only connection is an affinity or a practice in which that kind of amplification of individual abilities through knowledge sharing is desirable. How you do that in that kind of informal world, which I think is increasingly going to intersect with this world Doug's talking about. The world consists of that which is designed and that which just grows. And we've got machines like this and buildings like this, but we've also got people in them who evolve social practices independent of what anybody designed. And all of these things need to work together in order for it to work. So, there we are.
Where'd you hide the other stuff?
If you just tap the desktop, it'll bring up the folder.
Tack the desktop.
Your cursor, just put over to the right and tap the desktop. There you go.
Magic.
Third one down.
How do I get myself back?
Go back into, you lost yourself.
Is it
Oh.
Back. There you go. Okay. Just say okay.
This is what you call a public lesson. And so where was I? There I was. All right. I wish there was a button to make that alive. Ladies and gentlemen, you know, all the things he's saying are really important, and I've been in quite a few kind of organizations, and one of them was this big aerospace company, McDonnell Douglas, and before that I'd had interesting experiences about the thing you might call bonding. I'd even been lured into being part of Werner Erhard's world on his board of advisors, and watching with fascination but a little bit of concern about his operations and stuff. But he got people bonding, and the years I'd spent in the Navy too, I watched how people who were brought from all kinds of environments, who normally wouldn't even meet each other, much less be attracted to be friends, became buddies because they were dumped in there and they had to depend on each other. And ever since then I've really watched a lot of that going, and I just know that in order for organizations to come into coherence or something, there has to be that sort of thing. That's what I hear that's what he's talking about, and it's really important, and there can't be any way in which you can organize groups of humans to be effective, even if you say it's cold-blooded intellectual stuff. They're not going to be able to reach the peak without that kind of bonding, etc., like that. So, sorry, and I don't have a degree in what kind of psychology would that be? Social psychology? Anyway, so we move on a little bit and realize that also within any of these NICs we're talking about, besides that kind of bonding and social maturity, or whatever you want to call it, there also is a very considerable amount of knowledge exchange and training, etc. So having NICs be involved in a meta-NIC that themselves are concerned with the business of education and training and indoctrination and so like that has a lot of good bootstrapping payoff like that. So that's why there's a great appeal to me. So we've got a couple of these today, and so if we can actually get to your files, Roy, we can click over here in the. But one thing that just cripples me is only one button, in case I haven't said that before. Roy P. You tell them about yourself.
Sure.
Microphone.
Microphone is. Greetings. I'm glad to join you today from SRI, no longer Stanford Research Institute, but same building where Doug used to work, and occasionally. And glad here today to talk with you about a number of network improvement communities that we're engaged in at SRI. I direct something called the Center for Technology and Learning. These are faces of some of the 50 folks in our center who are brave enough to put them up on the web. And our mission is improving learning and teaching through innovation and inquiry in computing and communications. And how we do that is through two basic kinds of activities. One is we do a lot of fundamental research on learning and teaching, whether it involves technology or not. Several of us spent a couple years writing a book for the National Academy of Sciences called How People Learn, Mind-Brain Experience in School, that summarizes really revolutionary changes in our understanding of how learning and thinking and teaching should take place in journals like the Learning Sciences. But we also then build learning environments and put them into creative use and different use, and then also do systematic assessments of whether they make any difference, rather than just hoping that they will. In short, we do learning sciences and engineering. So the need I'm going to talk about today, we do a lot of different kinds of work. You can imagine with 50 folks from a lot of disciplines, a lot of different activities, but I'm going to talk about these next. And the key point here is that education in the United States is very fragmented, decentralized, and education improvement efforts, and there are a lot of them, are isolated and incremental. So how do we begin to leverage the knowledge in the system in some revolutionary ways? And we have found this notion of a networked improvement community a really powerful idea, a really generative idea. And we describe it as a coalition of organizations, each engaged in some similar improvement process. It might be making better math activities. It might be teacher development. It might be learning technology R&D. And we have a number of different projects funded by the federal government, foundations, occasionally companies, that network these organizations and craft new mechanisms for improving their isolated improvement processes. Very powerful thing, as Doug has highlighted, it's like learning to learn. Get a lot more power from that and build value and leverage knowledge for distributed communities. And I'm going to talk today and give you some sense of scale and a little bit of progress on 5 different networked improvement communities from our center. And they have these 5 different emphases. And later, I've left URLs up in the slides so you can go find out a lot more about them later. So it'll just be a little bit of tip of the iceberg talk today. But one of them is a project called Tapped In that creates an online professional development institute for lots of different teacher organizations and teachers. A second is an organization called CILT, Center for Innovative Learning Technology, which is a virtual center across scores of institutions in the United States and some overseas that do K-14 learning technology R&D. A third is called PALS, and this focuses on new approaches to learn, figuring out whether kids are learning science that are something more interesting than the multiple choice tests that we all hate. Fourth is something called OERL, which is an online library of different kinds of evaluation resources that can help make much better a lot of the work that's funded by these different agencies that involves new educational interventions. And finally, 4 is a project on interoperable mathematics education components. So I'll say a little bit about each one of these efforts. The first one, Tapped In, is led by Mark Schlager at our institute, and its focus is a community of practice model for scalable, sustainable teacher professional development, which I'll often call TPD, just to be short here. So what is Tapped In? It's basically a web-based virtual conference center that has emerged over the last several years with a lot of design work with different education professionals, K-16, 15 different partner organizations and agencies, and lots of different groups that come together to create online learning experiences with any computer, anytime, using multi-user virtual environment technologies, synchronous and asynchronous communication, storing, sharing of websites and documents, and a variety of community-wide activities and support services. So this gives you a little sense of the campus map, which keeps growing as the folks join and new offices get built and buildings get made. But there are comparable floor level and office level and suite kinds of plans. And there's been considerable growth. This is a research project. It's not a commercial effort. So this is kind of word of mouth. So we have about 7,000 members in this community, and a lot of use by schools of education, by local and state education agencies that have really taken to this as serving a variety of their needs, and both teacher and librarian professional development organizations and websites throughout different parts of the country where they have been feeling considerable deficiencies in face-to-face and standard teacher professional development activities. So what do people do in this environment? Well, they extend the capacity to interact online through some of the things we were hearing about from Howard a few minutes ago. Real-time and email help desks. There's always somebody there to help you around. There are scheduled after-school online discussion sessions, a pretty broad schedule on a variety of topics that are of interest. Free offices for individuals in small groups where they can have meetings, keep documents, do lots of other things. Newsletter, events calendar, meet me lists for affiliative groups of the kind that Howard was alluding to. How-to guides, start to save it so that it doesn't have to all be done each time anew, and consulting for TPD organizations. And educators do a lot of things in here. They pull together distributed project meetings with their colleagues and with their students. They lead or join discussions. They conduct and attend courses. They find resources, experts, and new colleagues, serve as resources for others, and try out ideas in a safe, supportive environment. So just a few lessons on this. There are a bunch of papers that you can get through the website. But content is important, but really the learning that's going on is not through finding the information resource, but around discourse around the content. And the membership diversity that you don't encounter in the physical world counterparts, these teacher professional organizations, is central. Members form groups that are crossing these different agencies, programs, projects, stakeholder groups through informal running into each other in the virtual hallways of these places and sharing what they're learning across these boundaries. And folks in this space need both private and public spaces to support what they do. It's not easy. Doug said, talk about nuts and bolts. It's really difficult. Sustaining these online communities hard, costly, takes a lot of staff. Teacher professional development organizations need to understand that the teacher's challenges begin where their efforts leave off. We get them in this environment after they close their doors and go home at night, and teachers are on this environment a lot of the time. Teachers need ownership of an online workplace that'll be there after all their courses and projects and workshops and grants end. There needs to be sustainability. And the interesting thing here repeatedly is our finding that teachers are ready for online learning like this, but many leaders of teacher development aren't. They don't know how to think about it in terms of budgeting. Their traditional approaches in a classroom don't transfer well to online settings. They see them as a costly risk instead of a strategic cost and time-saving tool, and really requires rethinking pedagogy, staffing, and other issues. Second network improvement community, led by Edis Qualmals, is called PALS. And the focus here is to create an interactive resource bank and support for various activities for improving standards-based science assessment. This is an effort funded by the National Science Foundation, and a page from the site that gives you a little bit of a sense. There are several hundred performance-based assessment items for science. Part of this National Science Education Standards effort in this country requires teachers to do things they don't know how to do, which is assess kids doing more authentic kinds of learning through hands-on activities and other things. There are a number of states and different groups, next list, who have been developing at their expense and considerable expense new forms of assessment to do this. What we've done in PALS is to create a place where those are well organized and available wherever you are, and where we provide administration procedures, places where people can be supported in learning how to work with these new approaches, and actual examples of student work. So a lot of different states, assessment consortia, and school districts are coming to be involved in that effort. Many of the lessons learned here are, I think, pretty common across efforts of this kind. The key participant groups have very different agendas. You need to spend a lot of time juggling the priorities that they bring to this issue. Professional development groups versus state science assessment programs and the like. They need to be involved, the participants and contributors and funders, from the very beginning in the design and seeding the content and in testing. The challenges often are really kind of co-evolutionary envisioning. People really have to imagine what this is going to be like and what troubles this is going to get them into, or new opportunities it's going to open. And for that reason, they have to be regularly engaged in the kinds of events as you do design and iteration. And this issue of collecting systematic evidence on quality, usability, and impact is real important in a venture like this. And we seek to do that. Third effort, also led by Edis, is called OERL. And the challenge here is the NSF funds literally hundreds of millions of dollars of projects that implement some new kind of curriculum, a new kind of undergraduate instruction, a new use of technology. And people tend not to be very good at doing evaluation, figuring out whether they make any difference. Well, if they can't figure that out, that's a problem, right? And so the point here is try to share models of best kind of evaluation practices and methodologies and provide examples of designs of evaluation, results of evaluation, and really begin to pool those resources, instruments, plans, and create a kind of improvement infrastructure around that evaluation work. This has been a very vibrant and lively activity in these various groups. Not a big surprise, exemplary content may be hard to find. It turns out when you start to bring together all these standards-oriented folks, they get to debate around what constitutes a good quality evaluation, and they find there are a lot of different criteria to consider. A lot of these folks in these communities don't spend a lot of time on the web, so there's been a lot of effort on navigation to engage them. And again, this notion of key stakeholder involvement. There's a lot of issue with customization for different kinds of user audiences. No one size fits all here. Chief school superintendents and people who are doing the assessments themselves don't necessarily want the same interface. In this theme that's going to come up repeatedly in our efforts, the need to support and provide incentives for content contributions. How do you do that? You've got to keep people enthusiastic and feeling like they're getting something out of the community by participating to keep them there. This is another networked improvement community, one that I've devoted a lot of energy to. It's something called the Center for Innovative Learning Technologies. If there were more time, I'd talk a lot more about the challenges that have led to its design, but the short version of the story is that there's huge expertise out there, very fragmented, around how to do research-informed learning technology research and development with kids around hard subjects like math, science, and things that the NSF funds. And so what we wanted to do, a number of us with our arms around each other there have done this kind of work for about 20 years, know a lot about how to do it, trained lots of people, but we continue to be frustrated at the bar of quality work in the field not being as high as we all know that it could be. And so the notion was to create a distributed center that could then engage in a lot of activities to try to raise the bar for the quality of the work going on in K-14 learning technology R&D. And what we do is we've spent a bunch of time defining some high priority kind of breakthrough themes for where we saw work going that's both advances in technology due to Moore's and Metcalfe's law, but also breakthrough opportunities with respect to willingness and interest for education reform and the kinds of problems that are facing schools. And we define visualization and modeling, ubiquitous computing, community tools, and assessments for learning as areas of that kind. We then bring together, we spend a lot of time inviting folks from research and industry and schools, policymakers, to these workshops, and have tuned over a few years here a process by which we do sharing of existing best practice, new knowledge, but brokering desires. So people say, here's what I learned, but I don't know this, and I really need it. And so there's a lot of work that goes on over this few-day meeting by which partnership groups across sectors and institutions and age levels and all kinds of things say, you know, the project I need your methodology, and I could use your technology, and you know, if you just gave me a little bit of money, I could do something about that. So we then support these folks that are the leadership groups that emerge in these workshops and then fund them. We've got the NSF to give us the funding, and they trust that we're good enough at being able to vet the quality of these things to go funding these seed efforts and hopefully bootstrapping in a better way what goes on in the community. And the kind of social meta-knowledge that Howard referred to a few minutes ago, we're trying to support with something called a SILT Knowledge Network, where we're starting to collect information about the people and the places and the projects and the courses people teach and the bibliography and the collaborations in a way that can be a central repository and resource for the community as a whole. And there's a postdoc training program. We figured that's really key to get leaders in here. So we've got 5 students doing postdocs in this activity. So it's interesting. It's a multi-level level kind of network improvement community. We're working a lot to improve our own processes across these different organizations. We're engaging through these annual meetings with the research community around these high priority areas. And we're really working hard to try to understand how to best weave in, given their very different priorities, industry, policy, makers around technology and learning, and believe me, they're concerned about studying impact and things, and teacher practitioners themselves. So, lesson learned here, if you're going to, it takes a lot of time to write papers about NICs, but it really takes a lot of time to run them. So much coordination, and a lot of the things that usually get viewed as overhead by partners become core NIC functions. I mean, the kinds of just keeping track of people, keeping track of connections, keeping track of who's influencing who and needs what, and all of that, as I think Doug learned years ago at SRI with the Network Information Center, it ends up becoming core to a NIC. Got to work with all your stakeholders early, and we found, at least in this one, that this concrete focus or venue for sharing and collaboration is critical. So in our case, it's how do we create projects that raise the bar for all of the things that we do, because we all know we could be doing better things than we do. And we use this mechanism of workshops. A lot of stuff happening here. Some of my favorite stories are, single researchers in obscure universities suddenly collaborating with leading researchers and having access to supercomputing to do visualization work, things like that. So a lot of good stuff there. One of the things we're doing right now is running, it's sponsored by Palm and Puma and Handspring and others, we're running a handheld learning applications competition. So we got them to underwrite, and our community set a bunch of standards around what we thought would be possible high-yield handheld learning applications. And there'll be an announcement about how that competition rolls out at the Exploratorium on March 6th. A lot of challenges here. Contracts has nearly killed us. Universities and other institutions like to own and not share. And our conditions for funding on these small chunks of money we give out are whatever gets produced is in the public domain, because we want to amplify the results of what's going on from this. Doesn't mean that all the prior work, of course, is compromised in that way. Nonetheless, it's been challenging. A lot of effort required to do this collaboration, and under usual models, that's not funded. Time and attention. NICs bring together the best and brightest, and therefore the busy. So all of these people I'm talking about run, $5, $10, $15 million centers, and this is like a new thing, right? So all of us are doing it, but it's pretty stressful. And on design, a lot of the work we've been trying to do brings together, for example, there are maybe 15 different projects that have kids study water quality with handheld computers, with simulations, with all kinds of stuff. And we've been trying to bring together the best understanding of all of those, and the tools, and the methodologies, and the curriculum, and the assessment. And we're finding from case studies like that, where we're trying to get synergy, that designing these things for adaptability to such collaborations from the start would really make a big difference. Last one. It's very quick, very quick. The last one is on ESCOT, which is a focus on improving the quality and interoperability and reuse of Java software components for teaching middle school math. And I won't go into all the little details, but basically lots of redundant efforts, lots of grants the NSF and others fund, and companies are producing their own spreadsheets, their own simulations, their own writing components, creating application islands. So what we've done in this project is to create a variety of conditions for setting up a test bed for evolving a knowledge network and interoperability software library for continuously improving that kind of work. Lots of developers, a few dozen different people developing components that are connected to the math standards. So the last point is about meta-NICs. And I'm happy to take this up in the discussions. even though we've got a lot of these NICs running out of our center, we don't have a lot of cross-NIC activity. And lots of effort here. It's significant that we don't, and I want us to talk about it. Each of these NICs has had different mechanisms and solution for doing its improvement. And we're finding it hard to do the integration. There you go.
There you go. The Jim needs his time too. That's terrific. Okay. So, tomorrow when we learn how to do knowledge integration, we'll sort of bundle all that up and say, here are the lessons integrated into one kind of handbook that he's got. So these, if you amplify that by all the activities that are going on that are relevant, you see that it really is a big challenge ahead. But without that, there are lots of lessons they know about, etc., that'd be very valuable for everybody else. Probably lots of them would be valuable if they could integrate them and sort of get them out on top and to be using too. Then there are lots of things that almost many other NICs would be doing that would be directly valuable to these guys, so that there is a big chance of that there. And so where was I? Tell me. Oh, these. That's funny. On mine, it would have stayed put. So anyway. So a few minutes. We introduced Jim Spohr, and we got to give him some time. But what I want to point out is, in the educational field, there are a number of different kinds of sort of improvement communities out there that you could look at that cover different things. And a very interesting one is the National School Board Association, which all the school boards in every state belong to a state one, and then all the states belong to a national one like that. But you say, here's something that they're trying to get down, and it sort of affects the communities in which the K-12, K-14 schools are going on. That's very important. This other is the National Association of State Universities and Land-Grant Colleges. That's been going for a long time, and so there's a very important one. So there are a number of organizations among the higher level universities. And the Stanford Learning Lab that's going on here has international partners, and there are very interesting things learning there about education too. And then there's something called the New Media Centers that is sort of out there actually helping a lot of state colleges, etc., get the new media involved in there and helping them learn how to use it, which is VORS. So these are a whole spread of things in there that are just very interesting, that I keep finding examples of improvement communities out there that are just very stimulating, etc. So there's no dearth of all that. So these are the, you could go to the websites, and I'm not going to stay there for that like this. But so anyway, so now Jim Spohr is going to tell you about a very unique educational NIC or IC, anyway, EOE. And he was at Apple when he co-founded this. You'll tell the story? Okay, and now we'll go through this exercise again. Look, I can learn. Boy, how do you like that? You know what to do from here?
Yes.
Oh, that's right, it's an apple.
That's not my presentation. But I can probably get it. Back. Don't let that stop you.
Is that it?
Well, let's see. Bootstrap Multimix.
Yeah, so did you play start with your microphone?
Yes. No, that's not right.
Well, you could trust Sun Microsystems.
Oh, yeah, that's what's happened.
What's happening?
It's been mislabeled.
Oh.
There we go. I had Jeff's. Before I start, there's the logo, or whatever you want to call it, for the EOE. For those who don't know, why does it look like that? Does anyone have a speculation as to why the EOE, Educational Object Economy logo, looks like that? Yes?
It looks like there's a lot of connections being formed there between separated things.
That's one reason. I heard it over here, though. Somebody said, looks like DNA. And boy, I wish the EOE could spread like this cold virus I have right now. That was our goal. Anyway, so stay away from me tonight. I'm dangerous. So the EOE, you've heard a little bit, it started while I was at Apple, funded by the National Science Foundation. But what the EOE is, and there's our URL, is really an online community where we're trying to build communities that help build knowledge. And what I'd like to do is just take you through, oops, why don't I do a slideshow here? Lower left?
Yeah, click on the little screen down the bottom.
Let's see what this does. Okay. Here we go. What we tried to do with the EOE is design a tool that was very simple for setting up online communities. And we used the community building tool ourselves to create a community that would be a directory of open source educational Java objects. So one of the things that you can do when you get to the site, let's check this out. Yeah, just before I advance this, you can see there's learning objects, member profile, news and events, other resources, professional papers, and get the GOE, which is a tool that allows you to set up your own EOE. We try to have a current feature up on the website, so when people come in, they can see a member of the community that's talking about something the community is doing. We are a directory of thousands and thousands of educational Java objects. About 30% of them are open source. It's not required that the object be open source, but we encourage that it be open source. And the reasons we encourage that it be open source are so that other people can add value to it. That's our brainchild of this EOE DNA, is that other people take what we've started, add a little value, make it better, and share it with somebody else. We have Java applets that range from A to Z. We arrange them by the Dewey Decimal System. When you do a search for educational objects, you can't really see it very well here, but this is a search I did for Boids, which are robot birds. Of course, it would be a lot nicer if I could show you the website live. What you get is a thumbnail picture, a little larger than a thumbnail picture, so you can get a sense of what the applet is. Believe me, I can see it. It looks a little better than that. And a brief little bit of information. One thing that we stress is attribution. So in addition to seeing what the applet looks like and the name of it, you also see who the author or creator of it was and the URL to it and a brief description. If you click on details, then you go to the details page. And the detail lets you know, among other things, how it's classified into the EOE, also who the submitter was, who put it into the EOE. And it also tells you whether or not it's open source, which is important information. And then we allow people to comment on the applet. People can add a comment. They can add some pedagogical tips, technical comments, and also metadata. This, down at the bottom, there's a little note that is there. It says terrific demo applet. Oftentimes, though, there's a little additional information that tells you how you can use the educational applet in your classroom. For instance, this one's categorized under life sciences, but people can use it under, teaching about physical sciences, or we actually used it to talk about how collective emergent behavior occurs in complex systems. Here's another one, Kepler's law. If you go to the EOE, you'll see thousands of these, right? And I'll talk to you about some problems with EOE in a minute. But if you go there, you'll see lots of them. And a lot of them are open source. In addition to having educational Java applets, we also have a resources page, sorry. In the resources page, we classify the resources. Essentially what the EOE is a database with various views onto the database. In the case of the EOE, we're very interested in tracking information about licensing of open source software, online communities, various other things that we track there. Network time error. Go away. Also, we have members sign up. It's an open membership policy, sort of like cooperatives. Anyone can sign up. We have founders, members, associates, core team members. We also have them enter whether they're primarily interested in the business applications, research, software development, education, or other. This helps in networking. Certain times somebody will be a developer, have created a great educational application, and be looking for business partners to help them advance it. We also classify them by what continent they're from. And I think we have every continent except Antarctica up there. When you click on people, founders, you get to see a little picture of them and a little information. This guy right here, Byron Henderson, who's one of the founders of the EOE, he was a very important person in the formation of the EOE. He works with the International Cooperative Alliance in Geneva, and he really helped us understand a lot about what we were doing in terms of how the international cooperative movement got started and spread. Once again, cooperatives are kind of like this viral form that I'm suffering from right now. Cooperatives are a good idea that spread. They started around the 1800s, and at the time they were spreading very rapidly. About a decade would pass before it would cooperatives would spread to the next country. Of course, in internet time, we have much faster spreading. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about where the EOE is spread. So we created the EOE, and after we created it, we wanted to share the DNA. We wanted to share our DNA and allow other people to set up online learning communities like we had set up. One of the first groups to do this was the California State University system. And a group up in Sonoma created a Merlot online learning community site. And I just want to spend just a second telling you about Merlot, because Merlot is very interesting. It's probably about 20 times larger than the EOE. Okay? And if you look at the EOE's children and grandchildren, it's amazing to see how the organizations that took the EOE added value, did certain things right, better than we did at the EOE, and that's what it's all about, sharing and adding value. The Apple Learning Interchange. This site is about 100 times larger than the EOE, and it was started based on the EOE. This is another one of my pet ones. If you go to the EOE website and look under GOE, you can see lots of places. This is the World Board Forum. This is a group that I helped form that's interested in ubiquitous computing, educational computing, and augmented reality.
You know, they have to turn it off at 6:30.
Okay.
So that's what's
Okay. All right. What was I going to say about Warbler? Oh, it's interesting. When this forum was created about 2 years ago, it collected a group of people who wanted to work on open source standards for augmented reality systems, and they've published a standard. So these are some of the kinds of things that this group has done. Now, let's see. I don't know if I'm at the last slide. Pretty near. I want to go back to Merlot for a minute, because the Merlot systems, part of the California State University system, Chuck Schneebeck, the person who started Merlot, is part of an organization called SHIA, State Higher Education Association. The SHIA organization saw what CSU had done, and 4 people came up after a meeting where he presented it, Oklahoma, Georgia, North Carolina, and I can't remember the 4th state, and they've set up their own EOEs. But when they were setting it up, they said, look, there's going to be a lot of redundancy. Why don't we each divide up the world a little bit? So California is biology, Oklahoma is physics, North Carolina is math, and Georgia is business applications. But this creates a problem. One of the challenges is that we needed a tool for connected community growth. If educational objects are added at one site, it'd be nice if they could propagate with appropriate metadata to other sites and be filtered. This is something that we've had at a goal at the EOE organization for about 3 years. we were, looking for funding, trying to figure out ways to do it. She is doing it. So that's one of the beauties of this system, is that each generation adds a little bit more value. One of the problems that we have with the EOE, and it's certainly most clear, I think, at the original EOE, is linked decay and sustainable growth. If you're a directory, your URLs can break and start fading. And this is a major problem. So your community has a half-life. It's decaying. And if you're not growing fast enough with many eyes, like we were hearing about last week with the open source community, finding the broken links and fitting them, soon your noise level is much higher than your signal level, and you go through an inversion. So that's a problem that we look forward to this EOE community, children and grandchildren, solving for us so that it can flow back into the original EOE. The other thing that I want to mention that's a challenge for the EOE is this whole notion of intellectual capital appreciation and attribution. One of the big problems with the education system, look at businesses as an improvement structure. It's clear that if you're in business and somebody's got a better idea, if you can make it cheaper, faster, you get that as fast as you can and you utilize it. If you're in education, think of all the local school systems as little Microsofts. They're little monopolies. And they don't have to be as innovative. So the point is, what's going to change that? And I don't think the change is going to happen at the K-12 level. It's going to happen at the higher education level. Why is that? It's already started to happen. The higher education schools are starting to produce online courses. And there they can compete. It's not like the monopoly that you have a local, there's only so many kids within a certain square mile radius of the school. Here you can reach out to the world. So I believe that we're really on the cusp. We're going to see something interesting in the next few years. It's going to be interesting to see how does this competition play out. I actually think that the local community colleges are going to do incredibly well. They're the ones who have sort of like a local lock. They're much more like the K-12 schools. If some organization is producing the best course at X, and you can get it cheaper and better there than at the college you're going to, hey, why should I spend 6 weeks in your class getting this degree when I can either pay a little less and get something faster, or pay a little bit more and have a more prestigious stamp on this course? So that's the kind of, when you think about networked improvement communities, remember there's got to be some way that improvement matters. In the K-12 schools, a lot of times improvement doesn't matter. And I really think it'd be fun to brainstorm alternatives to fix the K-12 system. My personal favorite at the moment is, and this is radical of course, is that we should have teachers take options in their students and their future earnings. Seriously. I'm not joking. You think I'm joking? If we did this, every time their students pay taxes, the teachers would get a little bit of a return. That would motivate the teachers to make sure there's little Bill Gates over there, and there's, well, maybe I'm only half serious. But anyway, I think that's the kind of innovative thinking we need to break out of this lock. And before my virus overwhelms me, I'll turn it back to Doug. Done?
Very stimulating. So you look at just what we've heard about so far, and you think about, how could you start from scratch and make something that could actually be helpful for these? But they started from scratch, and I guess. Now I got to go back. There isn't any way just to start where I was.
It's back. You're still there. You're still there.
So how do I reduce? Oh, sure, it's there, but then I got to hunt around to find out where I was. And with a memory like mine, oh well. I don't believe in computers anyway.
She got a lot of things open here at once. That's all it is. Just can get rid of a few presentations. Everybody's up here once you see. It's just too
Oh.
much stuff.
Well, somehow we got it. Okay. We have only a few more minutes. But the changing our human systems, there are a lot of what both these are talking about, we're doing that. And so I've got to squeeze this into a few minutes because we get turned off. They run out of film. This, I was struggling many years ago, 30-some years ago, with how do you get people to think about the impact of augmenting. And finally I thought about that. I came to work and taped that on there, and I started handing it to people. I said, if you take this de-augmentation, and suppose that's what was going to be inflicted on you, how much impact would that have on the world? See, he says, oh. See, if before that word processors and all, if that had been the way to do it, just think how much spare our language would be, what would our business processes have been, what would our education have been, etc. It would have had a tremendous effect if it happened that the best way you could have an instrument to write and draw. So anyway, then there's another one that I really like. It's saying, wow, look at these people running on their wheel bicycles. They really go like that. Oh, but another group of people come up and says, hey fellas, that's hard to learn and it's not natural to use. So that's what I think about all the time in today's GUI. It's sort of like somebody decided that it was too hard to learn and unnatural to use to go on and push for other kinds of interactive interfaces. So I just think of that over and over and over again. See, so that's just graphics. So you're trying to think about, well, what is the potential for moving ahead? Well, the potential is to let us explore. Hang gliders, guys doing the rollerblades that can pop around, the skateboards. I run across some kids jumping up over a curb, coming down with a skateboard and jumping up. Their feet aren't tied to the skateboard, but they go up and the skateboard goes where? How? They stomp on the back end, it flips the front end up like that, their front foot hits that front end like that and moves it on up like that, and they go right over. Do you think that could have been designed by sort of a human factors person or something? Anyway, we just really have to open it up for letting the crazy kids explore and finding out. Some of you might qualify too. So that's it. So anyway, we have to shut down for now. So I'm going to hit you a little later with some more kind of things like that. But we really got to untie our thinking from what we sort of agree and look like, and also what we listen to the marketing people out there about the products that they're going to give you. Because they all have to say it's easy to learn and natural to use or they won't make headway or something like that. Okay, we're taking a break and in about 10 minutes we're back together.